How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Set 6, and today I figured, seeing as it's 28 years since Final Fantasy VII came out, we'd take a little look at some of the recent interviews that came out around the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on PC. Because, you know, there was a few interesting things said. I've grabbed two of the interviews here, which I think kind of cover most of the bases of what was said, but I'm going to have a look through some of the others that came out as well, and, you know, make sure that I've not missed anything. So there might be another video on this, but for now, this is what we've got. Please do like the video and subscribe for future content, but let's jump straight into it. So, both of these interviews have got quite a bit of PC spec and PC challenges and things like that. You know, just talk about the specific nitty-gritty of doing a PC version. So we're going to skip over a lot of that because, as you know, the main focus on this channel is story stuff and anything that we can get that maybe gives us an indication of what's going to go on in Part 3, be that story or gameplay or anything like that. So that's what we're going to focus on for these interviews. And pretty much the whole first page of this interview, which comes from Den Faminco Gamer, yep, no idea, but pretty much the whole first page of that interview is talking about the PC stuff, until we get to the very last section of it. And at the end of the very first page, Hamaguchi responds to a question. And this one kind of flies in the face of what I just said a little bit, because this doesn't really relate to Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. What this relates to is just generally the future of the Final Fantasy franchise, and maybe a suggestion at what Hamaguchi and the team are going to be up to once the project's finished. Basically, the interviewer asks about when you experienced the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth world, did you feel like you wanted to see a new Final Fantasy game that used this system? And Hamaguchi responds and says pretty much yes, that their team has been accumulating know-how and that they feel like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is presenting a new way to play as the branding for the future of Final Fantasy. Therefore, I strongly want to use the accumulated know-how to connect it to the future rather than ending it here. And this has been something that a lot of us have spoke about in various podcasts and videos, that this, the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, the way that this game plays, should be the template going forwards for Final Fantasy. And obviously they'll iterate on it and adapt it in the same way that back in the day the ATB system came in various different flavours, but it was always the ATB system. This is going to be something similar from the sounds of what Hamaguchi is saying, or at least that's what he wants. He wants what they're achieving with the Final Fantasy VII Remake project to carry on in the mainline Final Fantasy, essentially. And yeah, like I say, a lot of us have kind of been speculating about this and hoping that this is going to be the case, and it seems like Hamaguchi's on board with that as well. So, good signs for the future of Final Fantasy in general. After that, we get a little bit more just general chat and marketing chat and things like that. And we also get a little bit about Vincent and how he refers to himself as a security guard in Rebirth and how that's a bit different from the OG. But the team just view it as fleshing it out. He is a Turk, he is there. It sort of is the role that he was fulfilling in the OG. So yeah, it makes sense, it makes sense. But the next interesting thing that we get to talk about is coming back to the minigames. And first off, we get a little talk about Queen's Blood again, and the fact that they're not actually planning on doing anything as far as bringing out a mobile game of Queen's Blood, or at least not at the moment. They're focusing on the remake project and the trilogy. That's more important, but there are going to be changes to Queen's Blood coming into Remake Part 3, you know, just to freshen the game up and mix it up a little bit. They are positive about including Queen's Blood going forwards, but they do want to tweak it a little bit. And I'm sure we've had this in an interview before where they've spoken about that. So yeah, more Queen's Blood is a good thing. But continuing on with the minigame talk, we talk about a misconception from recently, and even I spoke about this, the possibility that they may reduce the number of minigames in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, you know, because people had complained about it. But basically they say, no, that's not going to happen. There are going to be changes made to the minigames. There may be different minigames in some locations. They might alter how some minigames work, like I was saying about Queen's Blood a moment ago. But in general, it's going to be very similar to Rebirth from what I'm taking from this interview. It's just going to be different games, depending on circumstance and depending on what's going on in the narrative at that moment in time. You know, what's going to be relevant to make the area more interesting and put a bit more fun into it. So very similar approach to what we've already had. And as we finish this section of the interview, we get a little talk about the slap fight between Scarlet and Tifa on the canon. And he says something, a lot of people seem to have taken this as that the slap fight's going to happen definitely. I've kind of taken it a little bit differently. And what they've said is that they think that they're going to be able to make something really great, so please look forward to it. And it's the fact that he doesn't straight up say like, yes, we are keeping that part. It makes me think that maybe they're going to try and do something different, but something that's a bit grander. I would expect it to still happen on the canon in the Junon region, but I'm expecting it to be more than just a bit of a slap fight that we got in the OG. I think it's going to get a fair bit of expansion. We might even get a straight up one-on-one boss fight between Tifa and Scarlet. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah, there's options for what they do with this. So I'm not looking at this as just a case of, oh yeah, it's going to be there. I don't think it's just going to be a little slap fight on a canon. I think it's going to get expanded, and that could be very good. Looking forward to that. Now, the next one is a little bit of a crazy one. So we're going to go on a bit of a journey with this, so, you know, hold up. And bear in mind, I am using Google Translate for this. I am going to put the links to these interviews in the description of the video. You can go and check it out yourself. You can take your own opinions from this and stuff like that. But this is what I'm looking at right now. And the question is asked, will Cid and Vincent be controllable in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3? And Hamaguchi, the first part of this response is weird. And he says, it's hard to say for sure that it will be playable, but I think that's something that users, us, are naturally expecting. So I think this will be a way of providing an answer to that. So he basically says, I'm not sure, but probably. That feels like that's what that response is. I'm not sure, but probably. That's what we're shooting for. You all expect that, so that's what we're going to try and do. But maybe. So that's a little bit weird and a little bit concerning, but we'll move on from it. We'll pretend he didn't say it, and we'll pretend that everything's going to be fine, and that Space Boy and Chaos Boy are going to be there for us to play in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. But the response continues. And Hamaguchi says that Katase, I, and Nomura have all been of the opinion that the story in this remake project will adhere to the flow of the original to a certain extent. Therefore, there will be locations that could be the setting for the trilogy, and there will also be elements associated with them. So for now, I hope you will wait while letting your imagination run wild. What do you expect us to do with a response like that, Hamaguchi? Not let our imaginations run wild? What are you... Right, okay, let's calm down. So first off, maybe no Cid and Vincent, but probably Cid and Vincent. That's fine. I think they'll do it. I don't think they're going to mess that up. I think we will get Cid and Vincent as playable characters in Part 3. It could be a sketchy translation thing that's maybe taking what's been said out of context, maybe. I don't know. But I'm pretty confident we'll get Cid and Vincent. I'd be outraged if we didn't. Let's be completely honest. Outraged. But the whole following the flow of the original to a certain extent is quite interesting, because if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you know that I have been saying that there is a point coming where this story is going to go completely off the rails. And it hasn't come yet, but one of my locations and times that I fully expected it to happen is going to be the North Crater, which is where we're going to be heading at some point in Part 3. So that kind of gives me a little bit more fuel, but again, could be a translation thing, you never know. And then this talk that there'll be locations that could be the setting for the trilogy, and there will be elements associated with them. That's interesting, and that suggests that maybe we're going to go to some new places, potentially. He could just be talking about Wutai, and he could just be talking about Rocket Town, and it being associated with A, Cid, and B, going into space and smashing a rocket into the big meteor in the sky. So that's a possibility. Maybe I'm getting a little bit carried away with that one. But I just think there were some interesting words said in this response. Some very interesting words. What do you think about the words? Let me know in the comments below. But then the final part of the interview is talking about more users getting to experience the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. Obviously, this is something that they're focusing on with the release of Rebirth and Remake on PC. So Part 3 is obviously going to come to PC as well. But also, I would guess that this is at the very least talking about the Switch 2 and potentially the Xbox at some point. I think they are, you know, two of the front runners to get the remake project at some point ported over to them. So yeah, it seems like they're dropping hints that that's going to happen at some point. If I was going to say one or the other, I'd probably go with the Switch 2. And I've not looked at the specs of the Switch 2 at all, really. But I assume it'll be able to run it at a moderate level, so yeah, could happen. Could happen. Well, that's the end of this interview. And it was a bit weird. There was some interesting stuff in there. Like I say, let me know what you think about that interview in the comments below. But we're going to move on to the second interview that we've got. We've got a little bit less to talk about in this one, and this is an interview from Famitsu. And the Famitsu interview starts with the talk about Rebirth having a tough spot as the middle part of a trilogy, and how it's got to be different enough from the first part to be interesting and bring people in, because then that makes them interested what's going to happen in the third part, and also the narrative has got to kind of work in a certain way, and all that sort of stuff. You know, we've heard all this before, we've spoken about all this before. It's the sort of thing we were talking about pre-Rebirth. So nothing major here. A little bit of talk about the number of people who were waiting until the trilogy's complete in order to play it, and, you know, trying to convince those people like, no, get involved now, which, you know, gotta sell them games. And in general, this interview is a lot of talk like that, a lot more talk about the PC build, a lot of stuff that we've covered in the previous section of this video, but the main thing that comes up out of this interview is when we get into talking about progress on part 3. And there's a couple of interesting things that come up here. The first one we've already heard, basically. It's when Katase talks about how Nomura was given the scenario to complete, and at the end of the year he had completed the scenario for the third installment. So all the story's out there, and Katase thinks that we will be happy with the final chapter. So, fingers crossed, eh? Fingers crossed. But it's Hamaguchi who says something interesting, and it's the fact that they've got a build that confirms what they should aim for as a game, and they can already see the direction of where they're going to land. So basically what that sounds like is they've got like the basic framework of a build ready to go. None of the story elements will be plumbed into it or anything like that, but I'm certain that they'll have been working on locations that they know that they're going to visit. They will know, we are going to this place, we need to build this place. And on top of that, you've also got the framework from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because a lot of those locations we're going to be revisiting unless the story really does go crazily off the rails. We are going to be going back to these places. So the world that we've already experienced in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is probably going to be there, and that will probably have been the base framework that we're talking about here. And then they've added some sections onto that. So they've got a build that lays out what the world is going to look like to them by the end of the project. I think that's what they're talking about. I doubt they've done all of the character stuff. There'll be loads of fleshing out to do. The narrative probably won't be plumbed in or anything like that. But that's my interpretation of that response. That they've got a world with all of the locations loosely built. They still have to go in and flesh them out and everything like that and make them pretty. But in general, they know what the world is going to look like and what the game is going to look like. So that's pretty exciting. That is quite exciting. Like I say, I'm going to leave the links to both of these interviews in the description of the video. I'll put it in the comments as well, so you can go and check them out yourself. Let me know what you're thinking about these interviews, and things are looking good, because one of the suggestions that I've made and a few other people have made and Stream Chat keeps making is that it would be really fitting if part 3 of the remake trilogy comes out 30 years after Final Fantasy VII came out, so we'd be looking at January 31st, 2027. That means we've got 2 years to go, and if that's the case, we probably start hearing stuff around Christmas time. Very exciting times. But that's going to be the end of this one. So, like I say, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Please do like the video, subscribe for future content, share the video, do all of the things. But more importantly than all of that, have a great day.